Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Community Podcast, hosted by Philosopher Mindful.
You're here because you're drawn to exploring the deepest questions about human existence, the nature of values, and the very foundations of morality. You're seeking to understand the forces that shape our beliefs and behaviors, and you're not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
This podcast, Nietzsche, Deconstructing Morality, produced by the Philosopher Mindful team, with narration by Sophia Rodriguez.
And Liam Smith is your guide to navigating the complex and often controversial world of Friedrich Nietzsche's thought. In this podcast, Nietzsche, Deconstructing Morality, you'll discover the man behind the mask, an exploration of Nietzsche's life, influences, and the intellectual climate that shaped his radical ideas. The poison of ressentiment, unpacking Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment and how he links it to the creation of traditional morality. The reversal of values, examining how Nietzsche argues that traditional morality inverts natural values, demonizing strength and elevating weakness. The will to power, delving into Nietzsche's most complex idea, understanding it not as dominance but as the fundamental life force driving growth and self-overcoming. Beyond good and evil, exploring Nietzsche's vision for a revaluation of all values, moving beyond the limitations of traditional moral categories.
This podcast isn't just a lecture. It's an invitation to engage with challenging ideas, question your own assumptions, and embark on a journey of intellectual self-discovery. It's about understanding the roots of our moral beliefs and considering alternative perspectives. Welcome to your journey, dear members of the Philosopher Mindful community. With these insights, you can begin today to deconstruct the foundations of morality and explore the depths of Nietzsche's profound and transformative philosophy. Let's explore these ideas together.
Part 1. The Man and His Method, Setting the Stage for Moral Rebellion. In this first part, we're going to lay the groundwork for understanding Nietzsche's radical ideas by looking at the man himself and the intellectual climate he inhabited. This isn't just biographical detail. Understanding the context is essential for grasping the force of his philosophical rebellion. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Raaken, a small town in Prussia, which is now part of Germany. This was a time of significant upheaval in Europe. The Industrial Revolution was transforming society, scientific discoveries were challenging traditional beliefs, and political revolutions were shaking the established order. This atmosphere of change and questioning deeply influenced Nietzsche's thinking. Nietzsche came from a deeply religious background. His father was a Lutheran pastor. However, he eventually rejected Christianity, a pivotal moment that would shape his entire philosophical project. This rejection wasn't a flippant dismissal but a profound and agonizing struggle with the implications of religious belief in a rapidly changing world. It's important to understand this personal struggle to appreciate the intensity of his later critiques of religion and morality.
He was a brilliant student, excelling in classical philology, the study of ancient languages and texts. At a remarkably young age, he was appointed professor of classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland. This academic background gave him a deep understanding of ancient Greek culture and philosophy, which would also be a major source of inspiration and critique in his own work. He admired the pre-Socratic philosophers, those thinkers who predated Socrates, and focused on natural explanations of the world rather than abstract metaphysical systems. One particularly important influence during his early years was the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's work, especially The World as Will and Representation, had a profound impact on the young Nietzsche. Schopenhauer presented a pessimistic view of the world, arguing that it is driven by a blind, irrational force called the will. While Nietzsche would later diverge significantly from Schopenhauer, this initial encounter with his philosophy was crucial in shaping his own thinking, particularly the idea of a fundamental, driving force within all living things. We'll see how this evolves into Nietzsche's concept of the will to power later in this series. Now, the crucial point we need to emphasize here is Nietzsche's naturalistic approach. What do we mean by that? Simply put, Nietzsche believed that everything, including our thoughts, our values, and our moral beliefs, has a natural origin. He rejected the idea that morality comes from some external, supernatural source, like God or some abstract realm of ideal forms. Instead, he argued that morality is a human creation, a product of our psychology, our history, and our social interactions. This means that to understand morality, we need to look at its development within human history and psychology, not appeal to some divine or metaphysical explanation. This naturalistic lens is absolutely essential to understanding Nietzsche's entire project of critiquing traditional morality. It's what allows him to ask the questions he does about the origins of our moral values.
This approach is what allows him to ask questions like, where did our concepts of good and evil come from? What purpose do they serve? Who benefits from them? These are not questions you ask if you believe morality is divinely ordained. Two of Nietzsche's most important works, On the Genealogy of Morality and Beyond Good and Evil, are central to our discussion of his moral philosophy. In On the Genealogy of Morality, he traces the historical development of moral concepts, arguing that they have evolved over time and are not fixed or eternal. Beyond Good and Evil is a more systematic critique of traditional morality, where he lays out his own alternative vision. We'll be drawing heavily from these texts throughout this podcast series. In the next part, we'll begin to explore Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment and how he connects it to the creation of what he calls slave morality.
Part 2. The Poison of Ressentiment. The Genesis of Slave Morality. In this part, we're diving into one of Nietzsche's most important and complex concepts, ressentiment. This is the psychological engine, he argues, that drives the creation and perpetuation of what he calls slave morality. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle for understanding his critique of traditional values. So, what exactly is ressentiment? It's more than just simple resentment or anger. It's a deep-seated, simmering feeling of resentment, bitterness, and even envy, often experienced by those who feel powerless, oppressed, or inferior. It's not just a passing emotion. It's a persistent state of mind, a way of looking at the world. Think about it this way. Imagine someone who consistently feels overlooked or undervalued. They see others achieving success, enjoying privileges, or simply possessing qualities they lack. Instead of actively striving to improve their own situation, they become consumed by a sense of resentment towards those they perceive as more fortunate. This resentment festers, poisoning their outlook and shaping their values. This is the essence of ressentiment. Nietzsche argues that ressentiment is a reactive emotion. It doesn't originate from a spontaneous affirmation of one's own values or strength. Instead, it's a response to something external, a reaction to perceived injustice, inequality, or the superiority of others. It's a way of coping with feelings of powerlessness by projecting blame and negativity outwards.
Now, here's where Nietzsche's analysis becomes particularly controversial. He argues that this ressentiment is the very source of what he calls slave morality. This isn't about literal slavery in the historical sense, but rather a psychological state of subservience and dependence. Those who experience ressentiment, feeling unable to directly challenge the strong, create a system of values that condemns the very qualities they lack. They demonize strength, assertiveness, and self-affirmation, labeling them as evil. Conversely, they elevate the qualities associated with their own weakness, humility, meekness, passivity, as good. This is a key point. Ressentiment doesn't just create new values, it inverts existing ones. What was once considered noble and admirable is now seen as reprehensible. This inversion is a way for the weak to gain a kind of psychological victory. By labeling the qualities of the strong as evil, they can feel morally superior, even though they lack the power to enforce their values in the real world. Nietzsche saw this dynamic as particularly prevalent in religious systems, especially Christianity. He argued that the Christian emphasis on humility, meekness, and turning the other cheek is a prime example of ressentiment at work. He saw the concept of otherworldliness, the focus on a heavenly afterlife as a reward for earthly suffering, as a way of devaluing earthly life and coping with present hardship. By focusing on a future reward, the weak can find solace in their current powerlessness and even find a way to condemn those who enjoy earthly success and power.
Let's take an example. Imagine a society where physical strength is highly valued. Those who are physically weak might feel resentment towards the strong. They might then create a moral system that emphasizes spiritual strength over physical strength, claiming that humility and gentleness are more virtuous than physical prowess. This is a classic example of the reversal of values driven by ressentiment. This is why Nietzsche saw traditional morality as a life-denying force. It encourages self-denial, suppresses natural instincts, and fosters a sense of guilt and shame for those who dare to assert themselves. It's a way of keeping people in a state of psychological and spiritual subservience. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into this reversal of values and explore specific examples of how Nietzsche saw it playing out in Western culture.
Part 3: Guilt, the Will to Power, and the Reversal of Values. In this part, we'll explore the crucial role of guilt in Nietzsche's critique of morality and introduce his concept of the will to power. We'll also examine how these ideas connect to his notion of the reversal of values. Nietzsche saw guilt not as an inherent moral feeling but as a social and psychological construct, a tool used to control behavior. He argued that guilt is primarily a weapon wielded by the weak against the strong. By associating natural human instincts like assertiveness, ambition, and even the pursuit of pleasure with guilt and shame, the weak can effectively restrain the strong without resorting to physical force. Think about the Christian concepts of sin, judgment, and punishment. These ideas instill a deep sense of guilt in individuals for acting on their natural desires. The fear of divine retribution, of eternal damnation, becomes a powerful deterrent against behaviors deemed sinful. Nietzsche saw this as a prime example of how guilt is used to suppress the natural expression of human vitality.
He contrasted this with the strong. Those who affirm life and embrace their natural instincts. Point one, the strong, in Nietzsche's view, don't rely on guilt to regulate their behavior. They accept the natural order of competition, the struggle for existence, and the consequences of their actions. They don't feel the need to apologize for their strength or feel ashamed of their desires. They live according to what Nietzsche would call a master morality. 2. This brings us to one of Nietzsche's most central and often misunderstood concepts, the will to power. It's crucial to understand that this isn't simply a desire for dominance over others. It's a much broader and more fundamental concept. The will to power is the basic driving force in all life, the inherent striving for growth, expansion, self-overcoming, and the assertion of one's own existence. 3. It's the force that drives a plant to grow towards the sun, an animal to hunt for food, and a human being to pursue their goals and ambitions. It's the life force itself.
Nietzsche argued that traditional morality, with its emphasis on self-denial and the suppression of natural instincts, is in direct conflict with the will to power. By telling people to deny their desires and suppress their natural impulses, morality effectively weakens them, preventing them from fully realizing their potential. This brings us back to the reversal of values. Nietzsche argued that traditional morality has inverted the natural order, demonizing strength and elevating weakness. Qualities like pride, ambition, and self-assertion, which were once seen as virtues by the noble cultures of the past, are now condemned as vices. Conversely, qualities like humility, meekness, and passivity, which were often associated with the oppressed, are now praised as virtues for. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the nature of the will to power and explore what Nietzsche envisioned beyond the traditional framework of good and evil.
Nietzsche saw Christianity as a prime example of this reversal. Point 5, the figure of Christ, with his emphasis on suffering, humility, and forgiveness, becomes a symbol of weakness and passivity. The crucifixion, the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, becomes the central image of Christian morality. Nietzsche saw this as a glorification of weakness, a denial of the life-affirming forces of the will to power. He argued that by focusing on suffering and self-denial, Christianity has created a culture of resentment and self-loathing, a culture that is fundamentally hostile to life. Point 6, he believed that a true affirmation of life requires a rejection of these life-denying values and a re-evaluation of all values based on the principles of the will to power. Part 4. The will to power, the driving force of life. something more energetic and dynamic, reflecting the idea of striving and overcoming. Welcome back. In this part, we're going to tackle one of Nietzsche's most central, complex, and often misunderstood ideas, the will to power. This concept is absolutely crucial for understanding his critique of morality, and it's essential to clear up some common misconceptions. The biggest mistake people make is equating the will to power with a simple desire for dominance, a lust for control over others. While dominance can be one expression of the will to power, it's not the whole story. It's much broader and more fundamental than that. Think of the will to power as the basic driving force in all life. It's the inherent striving within every living being to grow, to expand, to overcome challenges, and to assert its existence. It's the underlying impulse behind all activity, all striving, all becoming. Let's use some analogies. Think of a plant growing toward the sunlight. It's not consciously trying to dominate the other plants around it. It's simply striving to fulfill its own potential, to reach the light and thrive. This is an expression of the will to power. Think of an animal hunting for food. It's not driven by a desire for cruelty or oppression. It's driven by the need to survive, to sustain its own life. This, too, is an expression of the will to power.
In human beings, the will to power manifests in more complex ways. It's the drive to achieve our goals, to overcome obstacles, to create art, to innovate, to learn, to strive for self-improvement, to leave our mark on the world. It's the force that pushes us to become more than we currently are. It's the engine of creativity and innovation. Now, how does this relate to Nietzsche's critique of morality? He argued that traditional morality, with its emphasis on self-denial, humility, and the suppression of natural instincts, is in direct opposition to the will to power. By telling people to deny their desires, to suppress their passions, to be meek and obedient, morality effectively weakens them, preventing them from fully realizing their potential. Nietzsche saw this as a life-denying force, a hindrance to human flourishing. He believed that a healthy, vibrant life is one that embraces the will to power, that strives for self-overcoming, and the constant creation of new values. Let's consider some examples. Think about the concept of self-sacrifice. In traditional morality, self-sacrifice is often seen as the ultimate virtue. But Nietzsche might ask, what is the motivation behind this self-sacrifice? Is it truly an act of strength and self-affirmation, or is it a sign of weakness, a way of avoiding the challenges of life? Is it an expression of the will to power or a denial of it? He might argue that true self-overcoming involves confronting challenges, embracing risks, and striving to become a stronger, more complete version of oneself, not denying oneself altogether.
Another important point is that the will to power is not about imposing one's will on others in a destructive or oppressive way. It's primarily about self-mastery, self-creation, and the affirmation of one's own unique perspective on the world. While conflict and competition are certainly part of life, and thus part of the expression of the will to power, the focus is on self-overcoming, not simply dominating others. Nietzsche believed that traditional morality, by suppressing the will to power, creates a culture of resentment, weakness, and nihilism. He sought to create a new way of valuing human existence, one that embraces the life-affirming forces of the will to power and encourages the striving for greatness. In our final part, we'll explore what Nietzsche envisioned beyond the traditional framework of good and evil, moving towards a revaluation of all values.
Part 5, Beyond Good and Evil, Towards a Revaluation of All Values. Welcome back to the final part of our exploration of Nietzsche's philosophy of morality. We've journeyed through his critique of traditional values, his concept of ressentiment, and the driving force of the will to power. Now we arrive at the core of his project. What did Nietzsche envision beyond good and evil? It's crucial to understand that Nietzsche wasn't advocating for moral nihilism in the common sense of the term. He wasn't saying that nothing matters, that there are no values at all. Rather, he was calling for a revaluation of all values, a radical rethinking of what we consider to be good and bad, right and wrong. He wanted to move beyond the limited and, in his view, life-denying categories of good and evil, as defined by what he called slave morality. He made a crucial distinction between two sets of value judgments, good/bad and good/evil. The traditional moral framework, the one he critiqued so vehemently, operated on the axis of good and evil. This framework, he argued, was a product of ressentiment, created by the weak to condemn the strong. It was based on a fundamental opposition between self-affirmation and self-denial, with self-denial being elevated as the highest virtue.
Nietzsche, however, proposed a different way of evaluating actions and qualities, the axis of good/bad. This framework is not based on resentment or the suppression of natural instincts, but rather on the affirmation of life and the promotion of the will to power. Good, in this sense, is anything that enhances life, that promotes growth, strength, and self-overcoming. Bad, on the other hand, is anything that diminishes life and leads to weakness, stagnation, and decline. This is where the concept of master morality comes in. It's important to understand that master here doesn't necessarily refer to social status or political power. It's more of a psychological type, a way of being in the world. Master morality is characterized by a strong affirmation of life, a celebration of strength, courage, and self-reliance. It's about creating one's own values, taking responsibility for one's own existence, and striving for excellence. It's vital to emphasize that this doesn't mean advocating for cruelty, oppression, or disregard for others. Nietzsche wasn't promoting a social Darwinist survival of the fittest mentality. Rather, he was emphasizing the importance of self-mastery, self-creation, and the pursuit of one's own highest potential. He believed that a society of strong, self-reliant individuals would ultimately be a more vibrant and flourishing society.
Nietzsche saw traditional morality as a form of nihilism, not in the sense of rejecting all values, but in the sense of rejecting the fundamental value of life itself. By suppressing the will to power and by encouraging self-denial and weakness, traditional morality, in his view, undermines the very foundations of human existence. His call for a revaluation of all values was an attempt to overcome this nihilism, to create a new way of valuing human life that is based on the affirmation of life's inherent worth and the celebration of human potential. So, what are the implications of Nietzsche's thought for our own understanding of morality, values, and the human condition? He challenges us to question the origins of our moral beliefs, to examine whether they truly serve life or whether they are rooted in resentment and the suppression of our natural instincts. He encourages us to take responsibility for creating our own values, to strive for self-overcoming, and to embrace the full potential of our being.
While Nietzsche's ideas are undoubtedly challenging and often controversial, they offer a powerful and thought-provoking perspective on the nature of morality and the human condition. They invite us to think critically about the values we live by and to consider what it truly means to live a fulfilling and meaningful life. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Nietzsche's philosophy. We hope this exploration has sparked your own thinking about morality and values. We encourage you to continue exploring these complex ideas and to engage in thoughtful discussion.